I'm sorry for what I said when I loved you. I can't remember who said it, whether it was me or him. I feel like a shattered mirror, hundreds of shards scattered onto the ground, reflecting only a broken, hollow woman, lied to more times than a dentist asking when the last time you flossed. The words, "I love you," are forever empty to me. It leaves a gut-wrenching pit in my stomach. I was pretty. I had ambitions. However, I saw something in this man that made me want to love him. But there I go, smiling again. The saddest people are the ones who laugh through their pain. I met him online. He was very attractive, and I was so confused as to why he was single. He had his own house, no kids, a nice car, and some interesting hobbies. He was apparently a magician. He threw cards as flourish and projectiles to snuff out candles. In this, he was always practicing. More often than not, he would be throwing things to act as a, projectile. He would get hired to perform at events such as kids' birthday parties and side street performances for outside concert venues, entertaining the crowds before they went in. I worked at a nursing home, assisting the elderly and disabled. I call them my kids, and they love me just as much as I love them. They were an escape for me. He was a little out there, I understand that now. But I've been lonely for so long that my caregiving nature took over for this poor man. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. We dated for 3 years, and I was unhappy the entire time. I couldn't escape. He started threatening to hurt himself or other people if we broke up, so I stayed with him out of fear. A small part of me thinks he knew. I never officially moved in with him, but I do know that he inherited his house and his car from his grandmother when she passed. The house was an old barn house with many acres of land and a large box-shaped basement. His grandfather used to be a mechanic, and the entire basement was his garage, where he worked on his cars. I say the basement is box-shaped because there was always 4 massive automotive machines in a 2x2 grid in the center, creating an outline to walk around. He had become increasingly abusive, not just emotionally, but physically. He would accidentally hit me with things and attempt to play it off to see if he could get away with it. It never worked, obviously. I never believed him. I was just some toy to him. I truly loved this man, and I wanted nothing more than the best for him. All I wanted to do was help, and I've been kicked to the dirt and treated like garbage. It was time for me to leave. My mother had never approved of my situation, as she was always calling me and telling me exactly what she thought of him, and that she was going to call the police. In hindsight, she was right. And even if it was blunt, and at the time it's not what I wanted to hear. At first, it seemed a little too simple, and that's what terrified me. I called him, and I explained that I didn't want to be with him anymore. I was shaking and shivering, and my stomach dropped further with each tear I let fall from my face as I choked back a sob. The reason I was crying was his response. He said, "Okay." That was it, nothing more. I continued to speak, trying to justify everything, that I never wanted to hurt him, and that I wished for the best for him, but I got nothing in return, and that mortified me. I was so used to the violence and the aggression, I was stammering with my words, shocked at the absence of the backlash of what I went through for the past few years. But I felt free, and it was liberating. I remember that I had a few personal belongings still there, and I calmly explained that I was going to come and retrieve them later when he wasn't home. I knew his work schedule, so tomorrow morning would have been the best opportunity. Biting my tongue, I hung up. don't know what came over me, but everything I had bottled up for the last few years flowed out as I sobbed, my black mascara running thick down my flushed, red cheeks. I knew what I did was right. There was absolutely no doubt about that, and I was going to be safe and happy again. I spent the next several hours crying and wiping my face with my hands, smearing the rubbery mixture of makeup and tears into the fabric of my jeans. Not sure when it happened, but I fell asleep. In the morning, I got myself ready and I made my way over to his house. At this point of the day, he shouldn't be home, that of which was confirmed when I pulled up to the house and his car was absent from the driveway. The house itself was probably beautiful at one point. Now it's run down and falling apart. Faded lavender paint curls back in chunks on the rotted wood of the front porch and the outer walls of the house. The driveway remains cracked and unkempt, littered thickly with weeds that have punched through the stone. Tall grasses stretched out towards the porch and the house, almost as if it's reaching out towards me, waiting to grab and suffocate me. I hate this place. It makes me nauseous, and the sheer smell of the outside has far too long been associated with the hours that, he and I would talk through the window of my car, waiting to drive away, but he pushed the conversation forward. It was cute. The wind blows cold this morning, which cuts deep past my clothes and straight to my bones, letting the shiver quake down my spine. Briefly, warming my body. I walk forward and onto the porch, my boots clunking beneath me, causing the old wood to groan. The wood was locked, or the door was locked, and that was quickly remedied by the spare key I still have on my key ring. Maybe I'll leave this in the kitchen for him, I thought. When I stepped inside, the house was numbingly frigid and quiet, and looking around, it was painful to glance upon everything here. While many of the memories I did have in this house were poor, they were my memories nonetheless, and they held value in my heart. The house had always been filthy. There's garbage piling up to my knees in various places, while the smell of rotting food and excrement pierced my nose. This was not my home, and it never was. I hated being here. I gingerly stepped forward, being careful not to trip on the various beer bottles and clothes thrown onto the ground. I only needed a few things from him, so I shouldn't be too long. That's when I heard something creak from behind me, as I turned to see the large, hulking form of him standing aggressively before me. His curly black hair lies frizzled and wild, his nose scrunched up to a snarl as his dark black pupils bored deep into my eyes, radiating pure hatred and malice. His chest was puffed out and his eyes were sunken in and bloodshot. My stomach dropped, and I opened my mouth to scream, but he charged forward, swinging his large arm towards me. His hand smashed onto my throat as his grip tightened, fingernails digging into my skin. I tried to scream, but the grip tightened, and I desperately tried to claw his hand off of me. He then threw me against a wall, and I bashed my head off the drywall, creating a new hole in the material. With a sickening crunch, I fell to the ground, disoriented and dizzy. I glanced upward towards him, choking on my breath and saliva, tears running hot down my face. I was so confused. He took a hold of my hair and he started dragging me away. I finally let loose a bloody shriek, feeling as though my hair was being ripped from my scalp. He started to pick up the pace, his boots smashing onto the ground, my shins bashing and bruising off of the door frames as we passed through, and we went through the back door and through the wild grass. My voice echoes through the wind to no avail. The nearest road is about a 7-minute drive, and the closest neighbors are very far from the house. He takes me to the side cellar entrance of the house, and he drops my head, that of which slams down onto the gravel and mud, causing my mouth to fill with dirt and my teeth to chip slightly. He places his boot onto my back, pinning me down as he unlocks the cellar door. He drags me down the stairs through the dark to what I could imagine was a cage of some sort. The door slammed shut and locked. I screamed. My voice echoed off of the stone walls, causing some of the vibrations to sound off through the basement. It was barely lit from the sunlight that poured onto the cellar door. I was sobbing and screeching, calling for help. He stood there, motionless, as the screams continued to echo. Eventually, he kicked the door of the cage, causing me to jump in surprise. He walked off to the cellar door, up to the stone stairs, and away. I heard the creak of the doors then slam shut, causing total darkness. I shouted until my voice gave out and I struggled to breathe. Silence. Minutes, hours, seconds. I don't know how much time had passed, but eventually he came back down with a tray of what was probably food, and he passed it through the bars. This repeated for a few days. My clothes were soaked with my bodily fluids, and the smell occasionally made me vomit up the little food I was given. I was being starved. I needed to escape, so I came up with a plan. My only plan was to have him lock the cage door and hit him with it, running for my life. I don't know what time it was, but when he came back down to the cellar again, there was no light. Maybe he closed the door. He began to unlock the door and hand me a bucket, where I took all of my strength to kick the cage door open, hitting him in the nose, causing him to yell out in pain. I got up quick, and my legs sore from the lack of movement, and it took me a few seconds to remember how to walk. I started sprinting, bashing into every piece of metal that was in the basement, scraping and bruising my legs on the various cars and tires everywhere. I couldn't see, and I was rushing blind. It was then that I heard something whiz through the air and slice down my calf, cutting thinly beneath the surface. It instantly became warm, and I knew that I was bleeding. I kept sprinting, going around and around the garage basement. I couldn't find the exit. My legs pulsated from the wound, and a few seconds go by as another whiz flies through the air and cuts my thigh, creating deeper lacerations. I scream out to nothing as I continue moving blindly in the dark, in a massive circle. This goes on for what seems like an eternity, and I don't know where he is. I fear always behind me. The objects kept flying through the air and striking my legs. Dozens of cuts and gashes now on my body, causing each new step to throb with pain and more blood to flow out. As I'm running, I hear his bootsteps echo with mine, so I know he's moving as I do. I feel around for things like a knockover to hopefully slow him down. I cannot find the exit, and I have to be careful knocking things over, because if I keep moving in a circle, eventually I'm going to trip on the very object that I knocked over. I found something large and metallic, a barrel, I think, and I threw it down behind me, and I hear something break off as it hits the ground. A sloshing noise is heard as I kept sprinting in the circle, being careful not to trip or to smash anything. It has been a few seconds since the last object has cut me, and I make my way around. My feet smash into the barrel I knocked over, and it stops me in my tracks. Another whiz is heard, and I try to move out of the way. Whatever it was, it missed and hit the ground, creating a shower of sparks. Seconds after, a gargantuan-sized flame plume erupts from the ground, illuminating the entire basement in a warm, threatening glow. Looking around, I could see the exit. However, it was just beyond the wall of flame. I would have to sprint around the other direction to reach it. I turned around, and he was about 10 feet from me, and in his left hand emanates a fistful of metal throwing knives. I was mortified, and I couldn't move back any further. The heat was too intense. He started walking closer, another knife within his grasp, and he was approaching me with such hatred, and I stood there, frozen. I had to make a decision, now. I was fighting for my life, and I needed to be smart, and he was so close now I could smell the putrid body odor coming off of him. Now, illuminated by the firelight, his form was sinister and horrifying. He was huge, and he slowly raised his arm, dagger in grip. I had to act fast. Maybe I could grab the knife. Maybe I could kick him. Maybe I could dive between his legs. Maybe I could... I turned around and I sprinted into the fire. My skin was searing hot. Flames licked all parts of my body, igniting my clothes, and I screamed out in pain. The heat was incredibly intense, and I felt sick. It was in that moment of panic that my foot gave out from underneath me, slipping on the slick gasoline, and I fell to the ground with a hard thud. The flames incinerating my entire body. My skin was bubbling and flaking away. My hair had been completely burned off, and my skin, my clothes, they were reduced to ash. The wounds on my legs began to cauterize and no longer bleeding as my skin and blood began to ignite. My vision was blurry, and the flame raged onto my body, charring what remains. Billowing out a blood-curdling shriek, I managed to stand up and jump out of the fire and onto the normal stone floor. As I did, the skin on my feet instantly sloshed off and spread like butter onto the cement, liquefying and gluing itself from the flash cooling of the rock floor. Tears no longer flowing out, but still profusely weeping, I ripped my foot off of the ground, tearing the skin fused to the stone clean off, and making my way to the now visible exit, missing large chunks of my heel. My flesh was cooking itself, and still very much alive. My skin charred and blackened, and I fought back the urge to throw up, and I used all of my willpower to storm the entrance and open the cellar door. When I touched the cool handle, pieces of burnt flesh around my knuckles crumbled off onto the ground. I managed to escape, and I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it from outside. And as did so, my fingernails snagged on the chipped red paint of the doors, and I watched as it cleanly ripped itself from its place, root and all. Some of the fats from under my skin still attached like melted mozzarella cheese. I began to run. I didn't bother with my car. I couldn't think straight anymore. I was going crazy from the shock. I fell. My feet slammed out onto the gravel, rubbing raw and almost down to the bone. I sprinted, only fueled by a reserve of adrenaline, exclusively granted by the primal fight-or-flight reactions of near death. My feet battered down onto the dirt as I made my way to the nearest road, hoping someone could help me. Anyone. I limped as I walked, surprising myself that I still could. The smell of burning hair and flesh nauseated me. I felt like throwing up. I wasn't sure if it was from the pain or the smell. I felt my feet now worn down to the fleshy, fatty core of my heel as I kept going forward, biting my lip through the pain, and I was unable to cry anymore. I was getting dizzy. I had been sprinting for a while now, in fear for my life, now cut up and burned alive. My vision was extremely cloudy and darkening, forming only a direct, straightforward cone of clarity. I began to slow down, and I limped, heavy. I couldn't take it anymore, as my ankle snapped from beneath me, causing me to stumble forward and roll onto the dirt and onto the sides of the road. Rocks and dirt and sticks glued themselves onto an oily, leathery flesh that was coagulating and sliding off of my shoulders like the sauce billowing out of a cheeseburger, leaving pieces attached to the ground as I tumble. I stopped at the base of an uprooted tree, conveniently smashing my bald head onto the sticks and muddy roots of the base. I glanced down towards myself, now a mutilated monster. A disfiguration of the beauty and human I once was. Now settling in the dirt, the smell of me came back and I became sick again. However, it was much too much to handle. I was losing myself. I had been starved for days, so the only material I was capable of producing was blood and stomach bile. I wasn't able to vomit off to the side. I no longer had the energy. It leaked out of my mouth and onto my stomach, whereas it immediately started bubbling and dissolving the skin and fats there. From the foaming acid of my bodily contents, my vision was going dark, and all I knew was pain. I glanced upwards towards the road I was attempting to reach. The very cars I desired drove past hastily, unaware of my presence. I couldn't raise anything except a few fingers towards the salvation I'd almost achieved. My arms slumped down onto the dirt, my strength completely diminished. One final breath leaves my body as my vision becomes enveloped in the darkness and is filled with nothing but the void.